we'll get started. So thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for coming on again. Good to see a lot of people from last week are back again to learn a little bit more. As I've said, we'll keep doing these every Thursday. I haven't got next Thursday's host lined up yet, but we will have something. If you have anything in particular you'd like to hear about or someone you'd like to hear from at the club, let me know. We'll try and get these going over the next 4 or 5 weeks, however long we're still stuck at home. So tonight we're lucky enough, we've got Brett Atley with us. Brett is the senior men's coaching director. So his role essentially is to oversee the 3 teams in that program, the senior men, the youth men and the under 21 men, just making sure that those guys are working together and achieving outcomes for the club as a whole. So sometimes, they focus on their own individual needs and what they need to do. So Brett's job is to make sure that those things are all sort of coming together and we're getting what we need as a club out of that program. So I'll pass on to Brett. I hope everyone can see his PowerPoint that's being shared there. Just give me a nod if you guys can all see that. Yep, perfect. Brett, if you just want to give everyone a little bit of a background on yourself and then you can jump into it. I'll keep an eye on the questions and let you know if anything comes in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. And it's an honour to come in and present to some coaches of the club and impart, hopefully, some of my knowledge. And with a bit of luck, you guys might be able to take 1 or 2 things away from my presentation tonight. So, first of all, just a little bit about me. I have been, I think it's my 3rd year this year with Hume City, obviously a fairly interrupted year, as we all know. Prior to that, I've had some coaching stints at Knox Raiders in their Siebel program and also their youth program, and also Bulleen Boomers in the champ youth program there. Also, I'm a teacher by trade, so I'm a teacher at Marsland College, which is a boys' school in Bulleen, and there I also look after the basketball program there, which is about 17 or 18 teams. And I coach the senior team there and have had a fair bit of success over the years. Obviously, school basketball is probably a little bit secondary to the VJBL, but, I've had some huge luck in geographical location in drawing wonderful players from Bulleen, Eltham, Diamond Valley, those sorts of clubs. As a player, I played all of my juniors at Nunawading Spectres, all the way through to Siebel teams, and also played at Knox as well. So I've sort of been around a little bit. Playing-wise, I was very localised at one club for the most of my career, and since then I've moved around a bit, but it's been certainly great to develop myself over the years from a teaching and a coaching perspective, and hopefully I can give you guys a bit tonight. In regards to this evening, please feel free to just jump in at any stage and ask questions. I'm not someone who is not interested in sort of hearing from people immediately. So if something's on your mind or there's something that's come up that you invoking some thoughts, please feel free to share them, because I'm happy to elaborate or extend on anything I'm saying tonight. Obviously, we've got 3 fairly large topics tonight to cover, so it's really impossible to, I suppose, go into a phenomenal amount of depth in such a short time, but I will touch on some key points, particularly from my own philosophy and my own perspective, and hopefully you get something out of that. So once again, welcome. Obviously, guys, we're in some really crazy times, and that's nothing new to any of us, and it's really disappointing where we find ourselves in not being able to engage in our hoops and being able to sort of be a part of working with younger athletes and being able to develop them. It's hugely disappointed for them, and it's also disappointing for us. So, hopefully we'll be out of it soon and we can start to look forward to what 2021 brings. So let's kick it off. So we start off with some in-game coaching. And when we talk about in-game coaching, it's quite, it's not a surprise, I suppose, that, why do we coach? Why are we coaches of basketball? From my perspective, it's not really about the training or the pre-season. Obviously part of, being a coach is all that groundwork, but ultimately the best part of coaching is the games. So being able to see all your hard work come to fruition and being able to put that into place and watch the athletes you work with execute, I suppose, the detail and execute the amount of work that you put in to get into where you are. So when we talk about in-game coaching, obviously the first thing we need to consider is what sort of strategy do you have, and what is your philosophy? And I suppose an extension of that is, what are your non-negotiable rules? When you talk about strategy, obviously strategy is around a particular game or a particular season or a particular tournament, and it often revolves around the playing group you have. When it comes to philosophy, it's more about how do you like to play? What sort of style do you like to your players to play? And for those things, it is often indicative of your playing group as well, and the sort of players that you have on your particular team. I suppose when we talk about philosophy, a lot of coaches may be risk adverse, or around that high risk, high reward. So, we talk about things like the people who risk averse, people who essentially play maybe more of a slower tempo, protect the ball, really focus on good shots, late in shot clock, more of a slower tempo in both offense and defense, where high risk, high reward is more of your run and gun style, I suppose, getting up the floor, taking early shots, sort of really pushing and giving yourself an opportunity to get more shots in the game. Other aspects that I think are really important, particularly around the game, is how you've organised your group based around, the personnel you have, how you discipline those guys, and a flow-on effect on that is, I suppose, the relationships that you hold. Because one thing that stands out to me is, I suppose, how do you manage a selfish player? How do you manage a selfish player, and how do you work with that player to be able to fit within the rules that you provide, things around the non-negotiable rules? And I listened to a little bit of Popovich, and he talks about, if they're selfish in one point of their life, they'll always be selfish, and he weeds out those selfish players. Unfortunately, in junior basketball, we don't have that luxury, really. We sort of, in a lot of ways, rep coaches generally get who they get, and they get to pick out of a fairly small pool of players. So often, you may have to pick talent over, I suppose, attitude, and then it's how you actually manage that attitude to work in your favour. And in saying that, we talk about that, those sort of relationships really do contribute to winning and losing. You can have the most talented group in the world that won't play for you, and you're really going to struggle to win games. But you can have a team that's semi-talented. You really do need some form of talent, but you can mold them to play together. You can mold them to be there for each other. And in those tough situations of games, you can really see the results of that. The big word when I think about in-game coaching is around the word adaptability. And as a coach, we talk about your philosophy and your strategy, but sometimes that just goes out the window. Sometimes, for various reasons, you're unable to be able to stick with that particular strategy or that particular game plan, and you must be able to adapt on the fly to be able to give yourself, an opportunity of winning. And when we talk about that, being changeable is a fine line. Sometimes you need to persist with what you're doing and give your players an opportunity to play through those low spots and play through those down times. But other times you really need to just pull the trigger, I suppose. And there is a really fine line between that persistence and the rigidity of a coach, where they become quite stubborn and really stick to what their plan is, and really struggle to, I suppose, adapt to that. So when we talk about adapting and changing within a game, like, how do we adapt? How do we change? And how do we change for the better, to make, I suppose, to help your athletes, I suppose, have greater achievement in that game? And there's a few things that, you need to really focus on curtailing in that situation. And it might be things like tempo, or the flow of your offense, things like the fast break options of your opponents, and just really maybe focusing on players on the opposition who are really damaging you and making it hard for you. So when we think about tempo, sometimes you need to sort of think about how you need to slow down the pace again. Your philosophy may be around a run and gun style, but if you're not getting the rewards out of that, sometimes you just have to flip it, and you have to flip it in a way that slows down the other team, because they may be an up-tempo side as well, and they're able to they may be more efficient than you at the time, and they may be essentially just doing things better than you. So you've got to try and junk things up and make, I suppose, affect the flow of their offense, in a sense where, we all know the options that you have, and it's just whether, when's the right time to actually pull the trigger on those things. As well as that, we look down at the 6 points below, and the 6 points that are a real focus for adapting in a game. And the first one is around the matchups that you have. You may have assignments for certain players who may not be fulfilling their role. Who's next up? Who's the next person that you can rely on to, I suppose, execute the game plan? There's also around screening. How are you guarding screeners? I think that's a really big one when you adapt in a game, and you also have to play to your strengths when you're using screening, or how you're guarding screening, essentially. So the example could be, you've got a player who's really beating you off the dribble constantly. You're really finding it hard to keep him off the dribble, or they're getting over screens, and the big guy's not really doing his job in sort of, I suppose, curtailing that penetration. So you might be showing and recovering, or you might be hedging out, and then that player's just turning the corner and just beating off the dribble. So one of the things that, particularly with junior players, the thing I really like to do with junior players is use the squeeze and go under model, particularly for against guards who are really quick and get in the lane, but maybe not the best shooters. And one thing with junior basketball that we notice is that, there's not many players that are like Sean Prendergast or Dame Lillard, who can just come one dribble around a screen and just pull the trigger because the player's half a step off or not able to bridge that gap. It's really rare here in Australia that we've got players that can do that, particularly in the junior levels. Obviously, when it becomes, senior basketball, we're operating on a very different level of player who are able to execute a lot better than the junior players. So one thing I really like to do to stop that side of things is use a squeeze and go under, where you're really encouraging the big man to create a gap for his teammate to go under that screen and be able to meet that dribbler. Okay, it's really about cutting angles and doing the things that I suppose prevent that penetration. The other thing to consider is around, we spoke a little bit about matchups, your combinations and your rotations on the floor. Do you go small? How do you change things up to create some disruption for the opposing team? In terms of guarding position, where do you send a ball handler? Which direction do you send them? Do you send them to the corners? I know some coaches are really sending people to the middle now at times. I find that quite problematic. So I would always work on that guarding position? Do you send them over screens? Do you ice them and send them back and not allow them to use that screen? There's so many different options in how you, I suppose, execute the guarding position of a ball handler, and how you execute the guarding position off the ball as well, and where your help lines are positioned. A lot of the emphasis at the moment is around pack line and how that can be executed. And we talk about, probably the best of that is Virginia University and Tony Bennett, and the way in which he's able to just keep teams essentially consistently under 60 points. When we consider the pack line and how that works, it requires a huge amount of time and a huge amount of commitment to be able to actually execute that. Because I know, particularly at the senior level with the pack line, if people are, half a step, too far off their man, it's just one pass and a shot. So it's something that needs to be drilled extensively. And it's something that I feel that, it's a difficult thing, I suppose, to get right. From my perspective, I've got a real focus on the one pass, not allowing that one pass away, and those easy shots, and having your help line stronger 2 passes, 3 passes away from the ball, and then that creating the rotations that can possibly get the closeout on corner shooters if there's quick rotation of the ball. The pace in which we play. So when we think about our pace, the up tempo, slow it down, junk it up, zone to man, there's different things you can do to disrupt the pace of a game, particularly if a team's really putting you to the sword. So I would certainly suggest that it's quite a good thing to mix things up, particularly in big games where you can disrupt the flow of a team. You can disrupt their flow of their offense and make them sort of second guess how they're going to run their offense based around, you might throw in a quick zone here or there, match up, a little half court trap. There's so many things you can put into place to disrupt that pace and then hopefully get yourself back into the game if you find that you're behind. The final one there is around shot selection. So I find, particularly with junior players and junior teams, often get hung up on the 3 ball and often get hung up on, possibly poor shot selection. And the one thing that, I would do as a coach, particularly if that starts to get away, is call a timeout and really encourage those players to get deeper in the paint, really create some help line defense to come, and then they get more shots in rhythm. They're not forcing their shots, or you're getting some layups, and you continue that scoreboard ticking over where, you're really able to, I suppose, make some change on the scoreboard in those situations. Is there any questions at this stage?
Yeah, Brett, I got one.
Thanks, Sarah.
Nice. Do you have any rules, I guess, for, say the team goes on like a 7-0 run? Do you tend to lead towards a timeout, or would you just try and have a sub so you can get some messages out?
It's a good question in the sense that, you've got to play your timeouts well. And that's a thing that I suppose is a real catalyst of that. So the example is, if you're in the last quarter and you've got 2 timeouts left, you'd burn one, I would say. If you've gone on a 7-0 run and things are getting away from you quite quickly, you probably need to settle the guys and really get them focused on coming back from that. I find it hard to not have a timeout in my back pocket in the last minute, last 2 minutes of the game when it gets close. I think that's just a cardinal sin for coaches that, burn their timeouts early and don't leave something up their sleeve down the stretch. Personally, it also depends on the age and how long you've coached teams for. So, if you've been with a group of players for a long time and I suppose they've got out of those situations before, and you trust it through maybe a sub or communication with your leaders in a free throw situation, then you may be able to avert having to use a timeout. But I think it's really circumstantial, and it's really if their heads start to drop and you can see them starting to become deflated, you just have to call that timeout and re-energize them. I would say. So as we just move on, I think that, you know, I think that we talk about this, this last point here when we talk about in-game, and we talk about player confidence. And Ciro, when you spoke about, you know, burning a timeout, that sometimes you just have to do things to keep the confidence high. You know, when you feel like the wheels are falling off, when, you know, you may feel it, but you can't show it. You know, you have to be able to, I suppose, rally the troops and give them an opportunity to be able to, I suppose, fight through that and give them an opportunity to bounce back from the setbacks they've had in those last few minutes that may have gone down for them. And, you know, if your players don't believe that they can win, then it's pretty obvious they're not going to win. So I think it's imperative that, you know, through your coaching during trainings and in the build up to games, you have to build that belief. And it might be as simple as things as just little comment. You know, you got this, you know, next shot mentality, all these sorts of things are so important for, I suppose, a player's confidence and the way in which they go about things. So I've only sort of touched on that. I haven't gone into a huge amount of detail in that, I suppose. But I just want to touch on a few things in regards to being adaptable, because I think that, and I've seen it a number of times where a coach sort of, you can see they want to sort of pull the trigger, you know, things around, you know, do I go to a zone? Do I go to a zone? And you know what? Junior basketball obviously is, you know, it's almost, people see it as a cardinal sin to play zone these days. And, you know, I certainly, within a game situation, I wouldn't ever start in a zone. You know, I'd always, you know, start in a man and have some rules around, you know, how we guard screeners, how we help off the, you know, get off the help lines, and all those sorts of things. But you know, it's, if you need to go to a zone, you need to go to a zone. And I suppose the example of that is I coached the state schoolboys team, the under 18 and under schoolboys team a few years back. And for my second year, we had a pretty good side and we're looking really good. And then you guys, all you know, you Broady long-time stays would know Jacob Epperson, who has just gone to his senior year at Creighton. He was my starting centre, 6'11", you know, could play the house down. And anyway, he got called out to high school the week before in the US, so he wasn't able to play. And then we lost another four-man, you know, the week before that. So he went in really, really undersized, playing against really big New South Wales and Queensland teams that were really, really tough to guard. And essentially, we didn't really have a choice. We had to play zone. And you know what? We just worked off that idea that this is our lot. We really don't have a choice. So we just had to grind it out. We ended up coming out with a bronze medal, but we actually beat New South Wales and Queensland during the tournament and probably just ran out of gas a little bit towards the end of the week. But, you know, it's an example where I would never, ever usually play zone for the best part of a whole tournament, but it was based around your I suppose, who you have on the floor or who you have available to you really dictates, I suppose, the sort of strategy that you use in a game. So, you know, the other part of that is just around, you know, your talent as well. Like if you're blessed with great big guys, but your guards are probably a little bit off, then, you know, you probably have to play the game a certain way. You probably have to play with a slower tempo. Where if you have really gun guards, you know, you're going to make them work hard. You're going to make them get up the floor. You're going to make them defend in the backcourt. You're going to make them really challenge the opposition to make mistakes. So, you know, when it comes to strategy and philosophy, you really can take anything you like out there, but you just have to understand that there's an opportunity to change, the way in which you coach during a game. Any other questions regarding that? Okay. Let's move a little bit to junior player development. And I've put a number of dot points in here, and but you guys as junior coaches know that player development is an absolute, it's a huge undertaking, and it's got so many different layers, and it's based around age, and it's based around delivery, and it's based around repetition, and it's based around all different aspects of the game where we have to I suppose use to give these kids the best possible opportunity to be the best players they can. And you know what, it really does start with the grassroots coaches. And, in Australia, you're never going to get rich being a basketball coach, it's fair to say. And, for most, for 95% of coaches in this country, they do it out of absolute love, and they do it out of the goodness of their heart. And, and everyone has really great intentions when they go into coaching. I don't think anyone does it for any other reason but to really do it for the kids, particularly at those younger levels. So I think that what we do in Australia, I think is really it's been really positive. And I think that over the last 10, 15 years, we've really made some inroads in the way we develop our kids. And what we're doing is really, it's actually really not far away from what they're doing in those top college programs in the States. I was blessed to be in the States in January, believe it or not, with the under 18 boys, and we had some wonderful experiences. I know Cecil's there. We went to UNC and Duke and and Virginia universities, and pretty much had the red carpet rolled out for us. And just to see the way in which they operate really suggests that we're doing things pretty well here. We really are. They certainly watching those coaches operate really showed me that what we're doing is certainly the right way to go. And I'm sure that Cecil would back me up on that as well. So we think about coaching versus teaching, and it's really interesting because coming from a coaching background. I began coaching when I was 15 years old, coaching domestic basketball, through to obviously then becoming a teacher. That the coaching was a great stepping stone to go into teaching. But then when you think about junior development, you have to put the teaching at the forefront. Okay, the coaching for me, it's sort of a two-part thing. You're almost the teacher in the training session, and then in the games, you're the coach. So there is a difference between the two. So for me, teaching is about pure instruction, pure development of skills, pure learning. Okay, where coaching is about, I suppose, more about driving and more about making decisions on the fly, more about making a group play together at the right, at the right time. So I find that it's quite easy to, I suppose, separate the two, because, you just have to put yourself in that training vein where, when you're at training, you have to be giving them something. You have to be improving them. You have to be giving them a little bit as an individual every session to be able to make those small steps. And then obviously with coaching, you look at a game situation where you've got to make those decisions. You've got to make decisions, and sometimes for the betterment of the team rather than the individual. And that can be hard. And basketball's a tough game like that when there's only 5 players on the court at a time. And, it's probably the biggest bugbear for me, with the love of this sport, is that sometimes people don't get an opportunity. And then that's where I suppose the trade-off can be. So the 3 buzzwords here in the second dot point is praise, prompt, and leave. So the strategy I use when working with younger players is I suppose, those 3 words. So you start off with, if your kid's done something wrong or there's a correction to be made, give them some praise first. Praise them on something they did. All right. So you ran the floor really well there. As the first maybe instance. The prompt might be, next time, lift your eyes so you can see what's in front of you. And then leave them. So the biggest thing with coaches that I find is that they can talk too much. And it seems ironic, the fact that I'm talking too much now, that's the case. But I think that you have to give small snippets of information. You can't overload players. So, sometimes you see a huddle and you see a coach and they're talking to kids for, 5-10 minutes. It's too much. I would say that when you do huddle, keep it to sort of maybe a timeout, or maybe we talk about sort of a 2-minute time frame. Don't keep them there for a long period of time. Give them 2-3 points max and let them go off and work on those. When it comes to drilling, you're always going to have your similar drills, your bag of tricks, but you've also got to keep things fresh. So you've got to put some new things in. And these days, when I was starting as a coach, I only just had an email address, and there was no way of searching for, things that, the top college coaches were doing, or the NBA coaches were doing, or even the Australian coaches were doing for that matter. It was really about what you'd learned as a player and how you develop those skills. And I was blessed to be involved in a really strong program where I did learn some good things, but there was not that ability to research like there is today. So if you're really struggling with drills sometimes, or you're struggling with particular sort of drills regarding, it might be something like rebounding or different defensive drills, then do your research, because there's so much stuff out there that can benefit your coaching. I suppose a little follow on to what I just said around the quickness and the quick points. When we talk about teaching and, working in a school, we're working with a different generation of players now. We're dealing with that instant gratification, the world of the social media world. So we need to be able to engage quickly. And also, I really like to do most of my drills competitive. All right. And how do you, most of my coaching has been around boys. So boys naturally gravitate towards competition. And I think that it's so important that you keep that competitive drive for the players to continue to work through their development. A lot of times now we talk about what is valued and what's not valued. And I think that, unfortunately, a lot of younger players get caught up in what's happening in the NBA and how the game's played. And, I'm sure you all know here that the NBA is not a real snapshot on how basketball's played, particularly in Australia. So, we need to be able to work on those fundamental things, particularly from those younger age groups, but they can continue to be worked on all the way through to your 16s, 18s, around your pivots and your stops and your fakes and your footwork, because those things, once they've learnt those things and once they're proficient at those things, they generally don't forget them. So it's the same with using the other side of their body. So, if there's any under 12s coaches here or younger coaches, you need to get them using their opposite hand as soon as you can. Things like their lefty layups, passing with both hands, pivoting off both feet, because once they master those things, and we talk about 10,000 hours, which is a huge amount to be a master at something. Once they've got that, they'll never lose it. So I think that's really the most important thing in terms of how we're developing our younger players. And you know what, when I think about my the school that I work at and the players that I get there, I get a talented players from all levels of basketball. But the thing that really does make kids really stand out is the kids that have those fundamentals, that can play the game. And most of the time they're kids that have played in first teams. They have been exposed to strong coaching, and they have been, some of them are, bigger clubs that have been really blessed to be able to have guys that have really put that groundwork in the early days. And that really, I suppose, is pivotal for young players who want to go to the next level and go to college and be able to experience basketball on the other side of the world, is that if they can do those things well, then they're really one half the battle. You know, you can't teach height, you can't teach athleticism, but you can certainly teach fundamentals. So that's something that I'd certainly push at all times. And obviously the last point there is around developing the basketball IQ, and that's all part of that. The pivots, all those sorts of things, it's all part of basketball IQ and how they play the game, and the decision making that they make. Already talked about that. One of the big things I really noticed when I did come back into coaching, I think in sort of around 2012 or 2011, 2012, was that a lot of players really struggled with timing and spacing, and being able to teach players how to space the floor, how to not get that nervous energy and go into the wrong spot, how to show timing in things like screening and cutting and all those sorts of things. You know, they're probably an extension of those things like the pivots and stuff that can really, I suppose, take a player to the next level. When I talk about clear and key language, one thing I would do with players when I start coaching them is teach them the terminology I use. So things around, okay, first session, this is a block, this is a corner, this is the elbow, all right, this is the split line, all right, this, you know, all those sorts, all that language which comes really naturally to coaches. For kids, if you don't really push that hard, you'll be saying, all right, I want 4 guys at the elbow. And they'll be like, you got kids going, oh. So I think that's really key, particularly with younger players, under 12s, under 14s, is that as a coach, you create that clear and key language at the start. So what it does is it actually maximizes your time in coaching at training, where you can actually have fast transitions from drill to drill and not waste that time of kids sort of being unsure where they have to go. We touched on the quick feedback. We talked about the too much instruction. And I suppose the last part around player development would be just really work on the small wins with your players. You know, I think sometimes we might expect too much. We might expect kids to develop too fast. But I think that if you focus on a couple of small wins per each session for the individuals, I think that what those small wins do is they accumulate, and over the period of 12 months that you might coach those players, the huge amount of improvement is what you'll see by sort of August, September of a rep season when you've had them for 12 months. Is there any questions regarding that? Okay. All right, so we will move to the last point if no one has any questions regarding that. And feel free, if you do have some after the fact, I'm happy to speak with anyone after this is finished and you know, I suppose stretch things out a little bit further. All right, the last one is in regards to tournament play. Found this an interesting topic because tournament play is, it's quite a big part of basketball in Australia, and particularly from you know rep teams that go into Australia Day, and then obviously classics or other tournaments throughout the year. It is a different style of coaching, I find, and and you certainly need to manage things a little bit differently compared to just playing on a Friday night or playing on Saturday, because you can really throw everything at a one game sort of experience. But when you get into tournament play, there's certainly a lot of tangibles you need to consider. And, you know, obviously there's different tournaments as well. I know for sometimes tournaments will be played over 5 days. You'll play 1 game a day. You might play 2 games on 1 or 2 game days. And that has a certain management style that you need to sort of use there. But then there's other times where you might play 3-4 times a day. And that, once again, needs to be adjusted. So the first thing, I really think about sort of week-long tournaments and the experience I've had with week-long tournaments, sort of national championships or national schools championships or the like, and the sort of things that I really focus on for those tournaments and how it sort of flows on to the end of the week, because essentially you play for the end of the week, and you have to play for the end of the week, and you have to create sort of structures around being ready for that final game. So the first thing's around injury management prevention. If you're traveling with a group, I would certainly suggest that, after every game, you would have some sort of injury management where you'd have ice, et cetera, et cetera. You guys would know all that. In regards to prevention, particularly when you get to those older athletes, sort of under 18s, under 16s, I certainly get quite nervous around things like ankle injuries. And what an ankle injury will mean to a player in a week-long tournament. If someone does an ankle on a Monday in a week-long tournament, that they're pretty much done. Like you're not going to get the best out of them. Anytime they do an ankle during a tournament, you're pretty much lost that player. You may be able to carry them somewhat, but they're certainly not going to be the player which you thought you had at the start of the week. So, I really do encourage taping of ankles or bracing of ankles, particularly in those long weeks, because particularly as kids get fatigued, they're also more susceptible to rolling ankles and doing things like that. So I certainly would highly recommend that for the tournaments, not necessarily with younger athletes. They're more, I suppose their joints are more elastic and they can bounce back a little bit better. But for the older athletes, that'd certainly be something I'll consider. Playing time considerations. When you play on a Friday night, you play to win, you play your combinations, you have those, and you generally, do what you need to do to get the W. But when you're in a week-long tournament, you have to manage things a little bit differently. You have to work on different rotations and combinations. For example, you might have a couple of studs on your team who are the big-time scorers, or the top end players, and a rule for me would be they would never sit at the same time. But what you would do is you'd have to put different players in combination with them to be able to remain competitive. So you might be playing your 9th and 10th guy with your 1 and 2 guy, and what that does is it creates opportunities for those guys that are lower in your rotation, but you also have the top end talent to be able to manage through those times. And a big part of that is getting to the last game with petrol in the tank. I've seen it a number of times, and probably early in my career there were a few tournaments where we might have got to the gold medal match or something like that, and some of the kids were just spent. They spent all their tickets and really did struggle to sort of execute when we really needed to. So that's certainly one thing I would suggest, is that under all circumstances, you need to have gas in the tank when you get to the end of the week. In regards to game style, once again, that's part of, I suppose, managing your players. There's sometimes when, you might see a weak link in an opponent in a tournament and you can sort of end the game in that first quarter. You really need to go for it. So you might get up the floor and really pressure for a full quarter and make them pay. There's other times where you might need to play in the half court and slow down the tempo and sort of, some of your players might be fatiguing, so you have to sort of slow down the game. So I think that in tournament play, your philosophy is really open and you really have to play to the energy levels of your players. And finally, it's really just play to your strengths. You have to play. When you play an opponent in a tournament, you have to see what their weaknesses are and how it I suppose, is matched up with your own strengths, and certainly play to those as best you can, particularly in the early stages of the tournament where you might be playing some, if you're a stronger team, you might be playing some weaker teams where you have the opportunity to really sort of get some easier wins and conserve some energy, because once you get to semi-finals and finals, certainly everything's out the window and you have to play as hard as you can, and you have to play to win at all costs in those situations. So So that's essentially what I've come up with tonight. Is there anyone that would like to contribute or would like to put anything forward?
You should be able to unmute yourselves if you need to.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, I got another question, Brett.
Oh, good, Ciro. Good on you, mate.
With tournaments, what maybe methods have you got to, I guess we want to try and speed up recovery. Obviously, we can't just magically do that, but is there anything you encourage your players to do throughout the tournament besides eat and sleep that may help them better prepare for a game in 2-3 hours?
Sure. So essentially, it would be around keeping mobile. So sitting down and allowing yourself to go stiff is probably the worst thing you can do. You need to continue to be moving. Obviously, it's passive movement. A lot of things I've seen recently is and it's really quite a new thing, is players, lying down with their legs up on the wall and helping that blood drain out of their legs and trying to prevent bleeds and things like that and sort of sore spots. Certainly, some players swear by it. Others think it's a bit of a waste of time, but it's certainly each their own. Obviously, stretching is a big one that you really need to do after the fact, and it's really about active stretching too. It's not about the static stretching, sitting down in seated hamstring stretches. It's about the active moving stretches. You might do some P&F stretches with a partner where you can really continue to keep that range of motion nice and fluid. They're the main things. Obviously after a day's play, you might get the ice bath going if you're in a hotel, or you might, obviously icing is a big part of that as well. The sore spots, the little knocks or the corkies that players may get.
So I got one for you, Brett. Just going back to when you were talking about playing zone to break up the flow of the game and everything else. I can understand the want to do that with elite level kids, like, the kids you're coaching are right up at the top rung and everything else. But when we're coaching down in the second or the third or the fourth team in 16s and 18s, what are your thoughts around just making them learn to play man and trying to get them to the point where they can play in a team where they do have the option to play zone, because you're trying to change the game. But some of those kids, we're still trying to teach to play man, and then putting them into a zone is just confusing them even further because they haven't even got the fundamentals of playing man down pat.
Yeah, and it's a really good question, Simon, that you asked, because, obviously, a lot of my thoughts often are premeditated towards some of those higher level players and the sort of players that I actually get to work with. And, I certainly think that you have to be able to, if they can't play man, then you're in big trouble, really, if you can't do that at all. But I think that obviously in the first instance, the man strategy has to be really tight. Things like keeping your man in front of you, how your help lines are situated, where do you deny the ball, all those sorts of things you can slowly teach to those teams that are the fourth and fifth teams. And then, it does take time. But I think that when it comes to zones, I think that for me, it's not about just sitting back in a 2-3 zone with your hands up. It's about everyone must, no one has the ball without being guarded. So essentially, it's almost like a matchup it's a matchup zone anyway, where it sort of evokes man-to-man principles. But what it's doing is it's actually clogging up some holes where you're getting maybe consistently burnt. So where a player consistently beats a certain player off the dribble and gets layup after layup after layup, you sort of have to make a change somewhere. It might start to be with a matchup. So you might start with a matchup first. But if this player is just way too good for the team you're coaching, then you have to make adjustments that continue to keep, I suppose, the belief in your players and keep their confidence high. Because if it's just layup after layup after layup, it certainly decimates players pretty quickly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But fundamentally, when I'm in that sort of position and we get a guy that's a bit of a good player like that, then I'm rotating and doubling him and getting the ball out of his hands.
Yeah.
And even prior to that, I'm trying to teach the guys not to let him get the ball.
Yeah.
Just keep the ball out of his hands. And
Yeah.
then if he does get it, then let's double and force it into someone else's hands and not just allow him to cut us to ribbons. So it's just a difference in philosophy. I haven't coached a great team of kids that have all their fundamentals down pat. So I just don't play zone at all. You know, we play full court man, and they, regardless of how tired they're getting or whatever else, they're up on the ball and we're full ball pressure the whole time. And it's just a fundamental of mine. You know, you talk about what, where you want to hold, what you want to hold true to yourself for what you're trying to teach your kids. I want to teach them how to play basketball. I don't want to teach them the easy way.
Sure. And I completely, your philosophy is honourable. Absolutely. And I think that, to say that teaching kids how to play a zone isn't teaching them how to play basketball, to me, I sort of disagree, because I just think that, zone is actually, it's a very, when you look at Olympics and you look at, top line competitions, you go to the Olympics, how many teams are playing zone out there? You know what I mean? So I think it's I think that it can have some real negative connotations playing zone, but I think that it actually, when players play a zone well, they're playing in sync, and they're playing in a piece of string, the way in which they move and the way they adjust and all those sorts of things. It's actually quite an art. So, but it does take time to develop. It's just like it does with you playing up tempo, in your face, man to man, full court. They're all aspects that are based around a philosophy that a coach develops over a period of time. And, my philosophy now is probably not my philosophy 10 years ago. My ideas evolve, my learnings evolved. I'm constantly trying to take things from, what else is out there and what other people are doing. And I make slight adjustments, but also my adjustments are around who my players are. So, what you're saying is right, Simon, that, for me, I've been blessed. I've coached some top-end players, and it means that I can really throw a bunch of different things at them. And I don't really have to teach them that. They already know how to do that. So it's more about decision-making rather than about a development and execution. Thanks, mate. All right.
Anyone else?
Yeah, just one other comment, Brett, Mark.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Yeah, good. I just sent you a note, bit of sarcasm when you talked about tournament play. It also helps if parents don't drink too much alcohol. Kids don't have sleepovers, and they don't eat too much McDonald's too. But
it's certainly a big help. I think it's almost, but sometimes better if the parents drink a bit of alcohol. It might relax them a little bit and not have them carry on like pork chops in the gyms.
No, good. But thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Good on you. Thanks, Mark. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you listening. I really hope you got something out of it. It really is scratching the surface from my perspective. It's really hard to go into immense detail in a short amount of time. And when I was putting this together, I'm looking at put videos in and do all this sort of stuff. I'm like, oh, it's going to blow out to 2 hours before we know it. So I try to keep it as brief for you guys, and I hope that you're able to take something away from it.
All right, we might wrap it up if no one else got any other questions. But I'm going through. I'll just show them. All right, thanks firstly, Brett, for giving up your time to go over some of this stuff with us. I think it's all very important points for VGL coaches in particular, and hopefully some good things everyone's taken away. We'll keep doing these, as I said, every Thursday. Just a reminder, Sunday morning is the junior skills session, so if you can push kids in your team to come along to them. We had, I think, about 60 last week, so we're trying to build that up. We'll have another one of these next Thursday. So, yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you to Brett, and hopefully we'll see you guys at the next one.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.